Hello and welcome to Wide Angle. The Afghan elections are at an impasse, or is Afghanistan at an impasse? Well, the implications are many, and we have a very distinguished panel indeed. We have on my extreme right Ambassador Vivek Katju, who was Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. He was also our ambassador in Kabul, of course, and Ambassador Jayant Prasad, who also was an ambassador in Kabul and in so many other locations. The impression is being created that there was something tantamount to an attempt at a coup by Abdullah, one of the two candidates. Is this gossip mongering, or is there some substance to it? Vivek.
No, there was a report recently in the New York Times which led to the expulsion of the New York Times Afghanistan correspondent, that some members of the security establishment in Afghanistan were unhappy with the manner in which events were unfolding, especially the difficulties which have arisen in the elections, and were planning to seize authority. Now, in this, Abdullah doesn't figure. Yes, last month in July, early July, Abdullah's supporters were very agitated, and at one stage he was under great pressure to declare himself as the president. And there was apprehension that Afghanistan may again face the prospect of having two presidents, and therefore this entire scheme would unravel. Abdullah, I think, managed to counsel restraint on his supporters, and that is when the Americans intervened in a very big way. So, I for one do not think that Abdullah is wanting to really rock the boat completely, though of course I do feel that he is unhappy and with great justification at what has taken place in the second round of the election, because the facts speak for themselves, and the facts are that the change in Mr. Ashraf Ghani's electoral fortunes
is abrupt.
No, is so massive that I doubt if any election anywhere in the world has witnessed this kind of a thing, especially as most of his vote has come from an area which is very turbulent and where women normally do not come out to vote. So, if we look at it in this fashion, then this election has been flawed, and it is a pity, because the first round went reasonably well, and I would say it was credible. The second round has led to these difficulties, and if you would like, we can discuss these in greater detail, but I have taken too much of your time.
No. So you have spread the cards on the table, as it were. Jayant, what is now, is the impasse about the Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah not agreeing? Is that the impasse? Not agreeing to a power sharing agreement. Is that what the impasse is?
No, I think there are two parts of the agreement. The first part of the agreement is to have a detailed accounting of votes and auditing of votes, of the totality of votes. And as Vivek said, the startling result of the second round was that Ashraf Ghani was shown to be leading by 1,900,000 votes, when in the first round he had trailed Abdullah by 900,000 votes. And also between the first and the second rounds, there was a difference of votes cast over 2 million, mostly from areas which were turbulent and where people's voting record, if you go back to the previous two elections and also to the parliamentary election, the voting record has not been over 50%. Their 100% voting has been shown. So obviously, patently, there was something wrong, and this was the first election in Afghanistan where the result of the election is going to be determined not by how people cast their vote, but how the votes were counted or are going to be counted now in the next 15 days. The second is that in all previous elections, South Asia is no exception to it. Pakistan, India, we are still a democracy of 67 years, we are still learning. Our early elections were not all free and fair, but the results of the political science research has shown that the winners and losers margins increased, but overall the results were in the right direction. That is because all the malpractices were done by the candidates. Here the malpractices were judged by the international community and by John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, to have been done by the Election Commission of Afghanistan. So this was a new phenomena for that country, and this is what they are coping with. To go back to your question, there are two parts of the agreement. One is that there would be auditing of votes, and that is proceeding, and there are many difficulties because even in the auditing, they have not imported people from outside abroad. They are Afghans who are doing the work, and they obviously take one side or the other. So there are daily disputes to be settled. But the second is the political agreement that there would be a power sharing. And I feel that the whole business of whether a coup was being planned or not is besides the point. There is a new Afghanistan that has been created in the last 12, 13 years, a group of educated young people who are trying to dissociate themselves with very strict and rigid affiliation to their ethnicity and to their tribe, and they want the two candidates. There is a great compulsion from the ground for the two candidates to agree to come together for a national purpose.
Would you say that that there is in fact pressure from below? Is it pressure from above, that there is that the people at the top, particularly the United States of America and John Kerry, they have indicated a preference. Their preference seems to be Ashraf Ghani, and they are in that case, and that seems to be the preference of Hamid Karzai. I mean, let's call yeah, a spade a spade.
Saeed, I am clearly of the view that the results of the first round of the elections startled both Karzai and his Pashtun supporters as well as the West. It was widely expected that Abdullah would lead in the first round. But I think the margin of his lead was not expected. He got around 45% of the vote, whereas Ghani got 32% of the vote. Now, this led to some desperation, because while both Abdullah and Ghani have had international exposure, clearly there is greater comfort with Ghani than with Abdullah.
Reason being?
Well, I would think Ghani has lived in the West. He
is that a criterion, that if you've lived in the West and you've been with the World Bank,
yeah,
then you are?
It is unfortunately a criteria. If you take Ukraine and you take some of the Baltic republics,
yeah, I mean,
you can
Saakashvili in Georgia,
you can witness some of
Liberia.
Yeah, you can say so. There is greater comfort with him. Abdullah too, he knows all these people, but Abdullah has inherited some of the nationalistic spirit of from his mentor Ahmad Shah Massoud. So to that extent, I think there is a degree of discomfort with him. I think the Pakistan factor is also there. Ashraf Ghani is a nationalist, no doubt about that. But Abdullah, I think, even though the Pakistanis have reached out to him, they still have a question mark in their mind. And therefore, all in all, the West was more comfortable with Ashraf Ghani. Now, that being the case, they really weighed in very heavily. And then, as I look at it, the script was, and since you asked that we call a spade, the script was that you rob the election, and I am using that word deliberately, But after that, you manage the consequences of the robbery, quote unquote. Now, that hasn't been as easy as I think the West or Karzai and his people expected. Now, which doesn't mean that at the end of the day, they will not be able to achieve a management. Because whereas, in my view, ethnic loyalties are still the dominant political theme in Afghanistan,
Yes.
there is a group of emerging youth who are thinking a little beyond that. I won't go to the extent on the youth bit and the new Afghanistan as Jayant has, but there are these new realities that are emerging.
Yeah, right.
Given all this, today we are seeing that through the process of trying to establish a national unity government, the Americans who are desperate to leave, who are really desperate, I think they are thoroughly exhausted.
I am not so sure.
No, they are thoroughly exhausted and they want to leave. Like most PAs who've gone into
Vivek,
Afghanistan.
if they were so tired, they would not be bouncing back all the way in Iraq. We shall come to that a little later. Just complete your thought, Vivek, and then I'll take you up from there.
One sentence
Yes.
only. So now, as I said, it is a question of managing the consequences.
Right.
And that really means that Ashraf Ghani becomes the president. But what do you do with Abdullah and his supporters? So you co-opt Abdullah's supporters into various important posts in the security sector and the economic sector. But then what about Abdullah? So I think at the moment the whole game is to somehow co-opt him into a new post which they call the chief executive. But that is at the moment not contemplated by the constitution. So you say that you give it 2 years for a lawyer jirga to work all this out. Now that I think till now, despite the call, Obama's call on Friday to both the candidates, that to now I doubt whether it has been settled. And one final point, the real danger to all this arrangement, I think if it comes from the very powerful governor of Balkh, Ata Noor.
You know, he is the one who actually said that he is going to rock the boat if Abdullah does not become president.
That's right.
Yes.
So
there you have. Now, the impression I have, Jayant, is that Karzai, the United States, Taliban, Ashraf Ghani, Pakistan are all coherent. Then where is the incoherence coming from?
no. This is a bit of an oversimplification.
All right, now
because you have
deconstruct.
you have to deconstruct it by looking at what has happened in Afghanistan in the last 13 years. It has become a cockpit of social experimentation and military engineering, and you started with counterinsurgency, then you went to counter-terrorism, and you know, when Obama, for instance, raised the level of US troops to 101,000 when he was spending.
When Petraeus was the Secretary
At the
of
height
Defense.
when I left Afghanistan in June 2010, US troops were 100,000 and there were 50,000 other troops in Afghanistan. And now they are going to be down to 10,000 and dwindle down to almost nothing at the end of 2016. This kind of oscillation for the end game of Afghanistan is very, very difficult for Afghans to fathom, because they don't know what the US intent is. Is the US intent nation building in Afghanistan? Are they fighting the real Taliban in Afghanistan? President Hamid Karzai for years extended his hand of friendship to both the Taliban and the Pakistan authorities, the Pakistan military, but the price that they were asking for from him was too high for him to pay. And then he told the Americans that they were fighting the wrong war. They were killing the dispensable Taliban. The real sanctuaries and the real training grounds of terrorists were not in Afghanistan, that Afghan villagers were being bombed, that the houses were being searched. and the intrusive house searches and night raids were something that he was completely against. And this had happened already by 2009. So this whole thing about having a CEO to temper a president who can get out of hand and out of control was something that the Americans tried unsuccessfully already in 2009 when Ashraf Ghani was their candidate for becoming CEO. And why is there such American preference or proclivity to have Ashraf Ghani in charge is because he has been effectively in charge of the transition process in Afghanistan, the handing over of Afghan security, Afghan development effort into the hands of Afghans themselves. This has been a 2-3 year process which has been presided over by Ashraf Ghani Ahmadzai because of his former incarnation.
Does that, according to you, qualify him to be the better candidate?
No, the point is who is the better candidate in Afghanistan really?
In your judgment.
For me, speaking for myself individually and as a representative of India, I would say that it is for the people of Afghanistan to decide who their leader should be. And let me say that government of India is in a position in Afghanistan to work with any leader in Afghanistan.
Once a diplomat, always a diplomat.
No, that's not true, because both Ashraf Ghani Ahmadzai and Abdullah at heart are Afghans.
Yes.
Afghans are known to have a strong sense of nationhood, whatever the ethnic differences, and a weak state. It has been traditional in completely the contrary of Pakistan, which has a strong state but a weak sense of nationhood. And therefore, whether it is Abdullah or Ashraf Ghani, so long as they stand for Afghanistan and so long as they work for creating a situation where Afghanistan stands on its feet and takes its own decisions, it is good for Afghanistan and good for India.
Jayant said just now that at one stage in 2009-10 onwards, Karzai's position was that the trouble is there, not here. The main trouble is in the Pakistani territory as far as the Taliban is concerned. Has that problem been handled between the Americans and the Pakistanis, or at what stage is it?
I don't think it's been handled.
And how does that play on the situation now?
But the Americans, I know you disagree, but I think the Americans are so desperate to get out of the morass of Afghanistan that they are willing to give the Pakistanis a very, very long rope on that count. So, as far as the sanctuaries are concerned, they really haven't put the kind of pressure that they could. As far as
what have these drones been doing then?
Well, these drones have been striking sporadically at high value targets. Some of them the Pakistani Taliban, some others. But I doubt whether they've really been effective in controlling the Afghan Taliban.
Right.
The Afghan Taliban is the chosen instrument of the Pakistanis to intervene in Afghanistan, and it has been so for the last 20 years or so, and it, to my mind, remains so, and that position hasn't changed. The real difficulty between Karzai and the Americans was, of course, some of the included some of the points that Jayant had mentioned, but it was this, that the Pakistanis were demanding of Karzai a price, as Jayant said, which he couldn't pay. And what was that price? In my mind, that price was they wanted to exercise a decisive influence, indeed a veto, over Afghanistan's India policy. And that Karzai said, as any Afghan leader would say, no. To that he said, that is not acceptable.
What would they want?
Who?
Jayant, what have you understood from Vivek's argument? What is it that, what is the price that they were extracting from Karzai?
Oh, there were a series of things that they wanted. First and foremost is what Vivek said. They said reduce India's salience in Afghanistan, although we only had a development partnership and some military training of their officers. But they said reduce the footprint, reduce the number of projects, create a corporation.
Who was that military officer who, after whom Petraeus came, who said, in fact, you must cut down Indian profile in Afghanistan? Remember
the American officer?
The McChrystal, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
crystal.
Some of the Americans bought this argument.
No,
Yeah.
You were completing your point.
No, the point is that there have been differences in US administration on how they look at Afghanistan's external allegiances. But to predicate the future of Afghanistan solely and exclusively on good behavior from its eastern flank, from Pakistan, has been a failure. It's been a failed policy since 2001. What happened in 2001? Let me go back to that. When Taliban and Al-Qaeda leaders were fleeing from Afghanistan, they all were cornered out of Kabul. Some ran to Jalalabad, some went north to Kunduz. From Kunduz, there was an airlift called the Airlift of Shame.
When the Pakistani generals were also.
When the Pakistani military leaders and Al-Qaeda and Taliban leaders were flown out from there.
Yes.
What the Pakistanis told Americans at that time is that Kabul has fallen, take care of the management of Afghanistan, make sure that the Northern Alliance doesn't go untrammeled over the rights of all the others. We will manage these leaders for you. And till today, the United States, the ISAF forces and the global community, international community as a whole, has been paying the consequences of that initial neglect. And that has continued to this date. Now the Americans have come around to a completely diametrically opposite view about the region's role in Afghanistan, because I agree with Vivek that President Obama has a great desire to get out of Afghanistan, and he's not able to because of the kind of stakes that the United States has embedded in that region now. But his effort is to get out of Afghanistan. And how does he get out of Afghanistan? By making it not a Western enterprise or a ISAF-led enterprise, but a regional enterprise. So this whole talk of a regional solution to Afghanistan was nowhere in sight till 2011, but somehow that has got great salience today. And everybody in track 2 is talking about how do we extricate Afghanistan by getting Iran and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Pakistan and India and Turkey and Russia and China working together.
In passing, you mentioned India also. Where is India in this game, Vivek?
Look, I would gently disagree with Jayant. The Americans in the West talk of a regional sort of enterprise in vis-a-vis Afghanistan, but I think what they really mean is Pakistan. Because the country that can influence events in Afghanistan among the neighbors.
Just one more point here.
Yes.
They will, of course, they will play. How does the current tensions with India, how do they impinge on that game plan now?
No, I'll come to that. Yeah. So they mean Pakistan.
We are running
No,
out
but
of
there
time.
is
Yes.
no disagreement there.
Okay.
I agree that their regional plan is still embedded in
It is
Pakistan.
embedded in Pakistan. Now, as far as India is concerned,
Yes.
quite frankly, over the last few years, I have developed the feeling that we haven't paid sufficient attention to Afghanistan. We followed a policy of benign neglect. We've maintained relations with Karzai. We are doing our assistance bit, but the kind of focus that it required, it didn't.
Well,
and one last point, and I think we've paid too much attention to Pakistani sensitivities with regard to our Afghan policy, and the result is that today, though Pakistan is very unpopular, it has a strategic advantage, largely because of the Afghan Taliban who are being held in reserve, and that is something which worries me.
Right. Thank you very much. Actually, we've run out of time.
Thank you.
We have run out of time, but what Indian position and where India stands in this evolving story is something that is not clear to us in New Delhi yet, because I don't think the Narendra Modi government has yet been able to focus exclusively on this area. And there's still some time left, and sooner rather than later we should have a policy as to what our interests are and how we propose to achieve them. Thank you and goodbye.